If you've ever played a critically acclaimed indie game within the past 11 years, there's a good chance you've played a game inspired by Super Metroid. Even games like Dark Souls have storytelling and level design inspirations that originate from the Metroid series. Super Metroid is one of the most critically acclaimed Metroidvania titles around, so much so that the genre itself is even partly named after it. It's Metroid's 35th anniversary this year, and what better way to celebrate a series I love than by making a YouTube review about one of its most iconic titles and then monetizing it. So let's find out what makes a Metroidvania a Metroidvania. What does Super Metroid do that makes it so iconic, and does the SNES game even still hold up after all these years? Or do the games that it inspired surpass it? Let's deep dive into the fully connected world of Super Metroid and find out if it really is one of the best games ever. Super Metroid opens up with a recap of what happened in the two previous entries. Samus cleaning out the space pirates on the planet Zebes and defeating their leader, Mother Brain, as well as the events in Metroid 2 where Samus went to the Metroid homeworld of SR-388 where she exterminated all of the bioweapon species except for one baby. She brings the baby Metroid off-world to a research station to be studied by Galactic Federation scientists. Shortly after dropping the baby Metroid off at Galactic Daycare, the station gets attacked by the space pirates and their leader, Ridley, who manages to kidnap the Metroid and retreat back to the planet Zebes from the first game. Samus chases after the pirates back to their repopulated base. And from there, the game really starts, and our fearless bounty hunter runs around the alien planet, taking down aggressive wildlife and space pirate forces that dominate the area. Diving deeper into the layers of the space pirate leaders and cleaning out their facilities, experimenting on recreating the Metroid bioweapons. Samus eventually ends up in the heart of Zebes where she encounters a giant Metroid, more powerful than the experimental ones, and just before she's consumed by it, the Metroid backs off. It's the baby from the start of the game. The baby flies off and Samus ventures down into the core of the space pirate's base where she fights off against a restored Mother Brain. Mother Brain gets the upper hand on the bounty hunter, and just before the robot monstrosity lasers our hero for good, the baby Metroid comes in for the save. After powering up Samus, the baby dies, taking another hit from Mother Brain, after which Samus blasts the space pirate leader into bits, which sets the whole planet into self-destruct mode. Samus races through the planet and flies off in her ship just in time as Zebes explodes behind her. Mission complete. And that's the story of Super Metroid, and it's totally serviceable for what it is. There's only really story at the very start of the game and at the very end of the game. And 99% of Super Metroid is just pure gameplay, which is great. And the gameplay of Super Metroid is where it really starts to shine. Super Metroid is a 2D open world action platformer. And what you do is you run around the expansive planet of Zebes trying to fight the leaders of the space pirates. Now, how do you get to those bosses? Well, you gotta progress through the game by finding mobility and weapon upgrades that are hidden throughout the world. You wanna get through this red door? Well, you gotta find the missile upgrade first. This yellow door? That's gonna be power bombs you'll need to find. This zone's too hot? This zone's underwater? You might need to find a different power suit upgrade to progress through these areas. Progress in Super Metroid is determined by upgrades, and different upgrades lead to different areas, and some of them can be acquired out of intended sequence, which has led to a diverse way to run through the game. Because Super Metroid is not level-based, because it's one big connected world, it has a unique feeling and atmosphere you don't really get in the other games from that era. You can see the areas slowly transition into one another, and each section of the world has multiple different paths you can take that connects them all together. You start off the game with only a blaster and only able to explore a very, very tiny portion of the map. But slowly, as you unlock new items, you're able to explore more areas, which grant you more new items, which lead you to bosses, which lead to areas, which lead to items, and you get it by now, right? As the game progresses, Samus becomes even more decked out in gear, By the end of the game, you'll have a bunch of missiles, HP, and beam attacks. In RPGs, you're shown your character's growth by their stats, by their levels going up, and by little numbers on the screen that say you now deal like plus 30 damage instead of plus 3 that you did all the way back at the start of your journey. In Super Metroid though, you see Samus's growth as her armor improves, as her weapons get increasingly more and more visually powerful, and as her movement options become more varied and fluid. Upgrades are tangible items like Morph Ball and Freeze Ray, not just slight stat bonuses. It's a progression system you can not only visually see, but you can feel, and it's progression that you earned through exploration and engaging with the game on a mechanical level, and that's something I really appreciate. There are two core aspects of Super Metroid's gameplay: fighting aliens and platforming. When it comes to fighting aliens, Samus has her arm cannon, which starts off as a pea shooter, but very quickly evolves into a deadly weapon with upgrades like the charge beam, spazer, wave beam, ice beam, power bombs, missiles, and super missiles. Fighting enemies is alright. There aren't any that pose that big of a threat, or at least they don't pose that much of a threat if you fight them with the proper equipment. Fighting enemies out of sequence can put you in a few tough spots, but overall the average alien isn't that challenging. The real combative challenge comes from the bosses. The bosses in Super Metroid not only look intimidating, but hit super hard. When you see experienced players go through Super Metroid, they can make these bosses look like chumps, but the first playthrough is gonna be tough. They all have their own unique quirks and attacks, and they provide mechanical mix-ups that really leave you on your toes. Honestly, every boss in Super Metroid is memorable. Kraid, Phantoon, Crocomire, Dragon, the 1,000 different Chorizos, Mother Brain, and Ridley. The second core aspect of the game would be platforming, but I guess a more accurate term would be world traversal. You're constantly navigating the world of Zebes, running, jumping, and rolling around it in order to progress to the next upgrade or boss encounter. Samus actually starts off with a decent amount of mobility, the ability to sprint, the ability to jump, and to wall jump. And throughout the game, she gains access to even more mobility upgrades, like the Morph Ball, High Jump Boots, Speed Booster, Spring Ball, Space Jump, and the Grappling Beam, all of which open up new ways to move through the game world. With the game's progression being dependent on upgrades, and getting those upgrades requires exploration, you end up needing to use all of those movement options in order to explore the world and eventually complete the game. There's no fast travel in Super Metroid. You gotta manually run from one level to the next. And after you beat a boss of an area, you might have to backtrack through that entire zone to get to the next location. There is a lot of running around and backtracking in Super Metroid. A core component of the game is exploring, and so the movement of the game, the actual moving from place to place, has to be fun. Not only are all the room layouts different and full of platforming challenges and enemies, which makes them fun to go through the first time, but the movement options and the ever-expanding mobility upgrades unlocked allow for backtracking through those rooms and zones to be fun. Yeah, it's fun when you can just hop through a room, but it's even more fun when you're wall jumping and grappling through the room. And then when you're screw attacking your way through a room. I mean, it all feels good. Like I said, the game relies on exploration to find upgrades, and those upgrades are needed to progress. So if the core of Super Metroid is exploration, then the exploration itself has to be fun. And I believe the movement of the game is so good that it makes the exploration so fun. And the game really nails down its core gameplay mechanics, thus leading to its core gameplay loop being incredibly enjoyable. After beating the game, an item percentage is shown, and it tells you how many of the upgrades you acquired. It also says how fast you beat the game, and you are in fact rewarded by completing the game faster. Samus gets a different end credits cutscene based on how fast you beat the game, with beating the game in under 3 hours giving you her pre-Zero Suit outfit. This also created a little bit of a challenge run of 100%ing the game in under 3 hours. It's cool how much of these little additions of a collection percentage and an in-game timer motivates players to replay the game, but do it even faster. I love that type of stuff. It's one of my favorite things in video games, planning routes and optimizing paths. Since Super Metroid is all about exploring, once you explore the game on the first playthrough, you can try to get through it even faster on your second playthrough now that you have an idea where everything is. Then on the third playthrough, you got a more optimized route on how to get to these places, and then before you know it, you're cruising through Super Metroid like a speedrunner. And that optimizing and speeding through games with a route in mind is one of my favorite things to do. And it's real dope how just a few numbers shown on the credits screen can motivate me to replay a game as many times as it has for Super Metroid. Now, it's hard to separate the gameplay from the level design when it comes to Metroidvanias, since both are so heavily connected when it comes to the genre. So let's just back up a little bit. What makes a game a Metroidvania? In my opinion, a Metroidvania is a game where you're in a big, interconnected world where game progression is tied to exploration and discovery. You go through an area until you find an upgrade, and then you need to backtrack and explore with your new upgrade to find out what new routes have opened up to you. Those new routes will take you down new paths, which unlock newer upgrades, which means you gotta backtrack and explore all those old areas all over again to find a newer path, and so on and so on. To me, it's a real solid gameplay loop. I talked about the movement and backtracking already and how much I enjoy that aspect of Super Metroid, but I'll take a little more time to talk about the levels themselves. So, Super Metroid's world is divided up into a few different areas, which are all pretty big, and I'm gonna mispronounce all of them, so let's go. You got Criteria, which is the small starting zone located on the surface, but then there's Brinstar, which is this jungle, swampy area that's also the largest zone in the whole game. It's full of a variety of aliens and secrets. Brinstar is the most dense zone, and the one that connects all of the others together. And you can see the transition rooms where the levels start to sprawl into one another. A really cool aspect about Brinstar is that it is the most alien feeling of all the zones because it isn't just square rooms followed by other square rooms. They're all wild and weird and full of unique and diverse life forms. And then you got North Fair next, which is this lava and acid covered landscape where the roughest, toughest space pirates hang out. You can't even enter North Fair at first without taking damage because of how oppressive the heat of the lava caverns is. It also houses the ruins of the Chozos, the species that lived on the planet before the space pirates. North Fair is set up to be the most dangerous of all the zones, from the lava to the pirates. It's a brutal place. The wrecked ship is this crashed spaceship from an ancient alien species. It's cramped and run down and full of ghosts. The gimmick there is you gotta turn the power back on, and it's also got a lot of breakable walls. I mean, there are a lot of breakable sections in the wrecked ship that just house a bunch of secrets and upgrades. And then you have Meridia, which is the water level of Super Metroid, and like most water levels, this is the worst part of the game. So I've talked about this before in other videos, but most Metroidvanias have that, stuck moment. You know, that moment where you're stuck and you don't know what to do or where to go? Super Metroid's version of that is gaining access to Meridia. So to get into Meridia, you need to realize that this broken pipe you ran by is actually similar to this unbroken pipe you ran through 2 hours ago. Then you gotta power bomb the pipe, and that will open up access to Meridia. The water zone itself is real big and real confusing. I think it's the worst zone to navigate. It's just full of rooms that look really similar and full of rooms that loop into themselves, which means you can end up going in circles over and over again. For me, Meridia does have some creative stuff going on, especially after you get the space jump, but overall it's probably the biggest hurdle to get through and is the spot I hear complained about the most. The last zone of the game is Turian, which is where the climax is. All the Metroids are there, plus Mother Brain. It's short, but it's cramped and full of scary enemies, acid, and the big bad Brain herself. What's so cool about this game is that all these zones are distinct, and they blend into each other really well. There's no drastic shift from like the fire zone to the ice zone or whatever. There's a cohesiveness in Super Metroid that makes the world feel like an alien planet. And that feeling, that atmosphere, definitely comes from the unique layouts of all the rooms, the hidden secrets strewn about them, and the unique gimmicks and designs of each of the zones that makes them distinct and memorable. While the gameplay itself is fantastic and the level design is immaculate, what really pushes Super Metroid above and beyond is the atmosphere it creates through the visuals and the sounds that play throughout the entire game. Starting off with how the game looks. The game looks great. It's able to have this creepy otherworldly planet vibe, as well as have vibrant colors that really pop. So many areas are so visually distinct. Seeing the lush, almost wild greens of Brinstar compared to the oppressively red color palette of Norfair. Just look at these places. The backgrounds are all filled with little doodads and gizmos that bring Zebes to life. Think of how boring this room would look without any of these bubbles, or how less interesting the wrecked ship would be if it was all just gray blocks instead of being filled with broken technology. Really, truly, the environment of the game is so strong that your eyes are never bored of the visuals on screen. And not just the backgrounds look good, the models look amazing as well. Each enemy is memorable, with distinct designs and colors that let you know exactly what you're dealing with whenever you walk into a room. And the bosses. Whew! The bosses! This is what Kraid looked like in Metroid 1. And this is what Kraid looks like in Super Metroid. These big baddies have so much more ferocity and raw intimidation etched into every pixel of their design. Some of these bosses are icons in the video game lexicon of visual design. And it's not just the visuals of these bosses that are iconic, but the roars they make too. Aw man, the sound design in Super Metroid is top tier. The cries of enemies as they attack and die by Samus's arm cannon, the laser beams, the power bombs, oh my god, the tune that plays when you pick up a new upgrade? That's gold right there. The music in Super Metroid is so good, you even end up hearing echoes of it in later games. The dread but also suspenseful buildup of the Norfair track, or the creepy unsettlingness of Meridia's theme. This music cradles the game in an atmosphere so palpable you can taste it. The visuals and sound effects weren't just used to add to the gameplay, but there's actual attempts to add visual story beats to the game as well. Super Metroid has a few proto cutscenes. The opening segment from the title screen where you see the scientists' dead bodies, running through the tilting screens, Ridley's introduction, both of them. Everything with the baby Metroid from the beginning all the way to the end. The ending confrontation with Mother Brain and the baby also make for some real cinematic storytelling. The other bosses get some strong stuff too, like Kraid's introduction and Crocomeyer's death? That's an impressionable moment that lasts. In the end, it is just looking at a bunch of pixeled sprites and hearing like MIDI music, but it gives you the feeling like you're on an alien world with monsters lurking just off screen. And that's the kind of magic only a game like Super Metroid can provide. The Metroid series is considered a classic when it comes to gaming. A highly influential series with a small set of truly iconic characters that have been around since the late 80s. I was actually introduced to Metroid via Super Smash Bros. 64, which would be the only time you would get an N64 Samus. And I wouldn't play a Metroid game until nearly 2 decades later when I bought a Super Nintendo Mini. Yet from all of the internet people I've heard talk about Metroid, and more specifically Super Metroid, you would think that it was a series everyone was familiar with and had played, and that I was just late to the party. The thing about Metroid as a series is it's never been as popular as you might think. Even Super Metroid, a game critically considered to be one of the main inspirations of an entire genre, is only the 4th highest selling game in the series at 1.4 million copies sold, which is 200,000 less copies sold than Shadow the Hedgehog. While Super Metroid is great, its greatness is certainly felt in the games inspired by it. Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Cave Story, Ori and the Blind Forest, Shantae, Hollow Knight. These games have different styles, different takes on story, and different balances between exploration and combat, but they share the same core elements as Super Metroid. And honestly, it's hard for me to think that some people would like any of these Metroidvanias, but not enjoy Super Metroid. Beyond the influence in other games and being the founding of a whole genre of games, Super Metroid is also one of the first popular speed games. Popular speedrunning event AGDQ used to end with a big Super Metroid race. That's where save or kill the animals came from, since during the ending escape, you can go out of your way to save a bunch of animals, or you can save some frames by leaving those animals to die. I touched on this earlier in the video, but the incentive to replay the game and do better and better each time, and the sequence breaking that allows you to skip certain areas and thus beat the game even faster, would end up becoming a core aspect of an entire way people play games today. The influence of Super Metroid is really strong. Even if financially the Metroid series hasn't really performed as well as the internet nerds might think it did, the influence that series, if not specifically Super Metroid, has had on gaming as a whole is just legendary. Great art, great music, amazing gameplay, and iconic level design had led Super Metroid to massively influence the gaming world by birthing a whole genre and being one of the earliest games to promote speedrunning and sequence breaking. I played this game for the first time in 2018 and it blew me away. I'm very biased when it comes to Super Metroid, but there's no nostalgia here. It's just a solid game. I will say there are points where the game does sag, but for all the things Super Metroid pioneered, having a good water level just wasn't one of them. If I was a grouchy, wannabe boomer, I'd say something like, "Oh, they just don't make games like Super Metroid today." But that's not true. Actually, I would argue it's the exact opposite. Because of Super Metroid's influence, we've gotten plenty of games that are just like it. And they're all good. But there's a different vibe when playing the OG. Like, it just hits every note so well, and is then over quick. It's a game that hits a high score with everything it offers. Sick upgrades, sound effects, bosses, everything is just good. And it doesn't overstay its welcome. Alright, I'm done gushing. There's a lot to love in Super Metroid. It's a very high quality piece of entertainment, and it definitely deserves its spot as one of the best games ever.